It is my great pleasure to give you warm hearts and joyful feelings going this morning by talking about global warming. So, when I was young, my mother conveyed the sense, always be aware of where the danger lies. That's very easy to do with global warming. My dad said, don't worry about that so much. Tend to your spirit. So I'm going to try to balance the two in this. Neither one of them focused on the tasks of reality. And that's how I'm going to try to thread these two things together. And it struck me in preparing this, there are solutions to keeping global warming from getting a lot worse. And they're always presented as sort of things to do. And then there's what we talk about, dignity and compassion and so on, as if they're two separate things, and I want to interweave them this morning. So I want to start with an overarching framework for everything. And that's the work of William Bridges on life changes. We all go through them. And the thing in particular are those changes that change us. It's not just the circumstances, but we're different afterwards going through it. And he says it starts, life as it is changes radically, and we don't know what it's going to look like. And you know what that's like in your personal life. And we're kind of up against it as a world when it comes to global warming. If things are going to change, we don't know what it's going to look like. And people tend at the start to focus on loss, losing the life we've known. And there's all kinds of feelings around it. Sadness, fear of the unknown, anger that somebody led us there. Could be courage and strength, could be all kinds of things. You're entitled to whatever feelings and thoughts you have. And it's important to talk with each other about them so you're not isolated with it. So that tends gradually to morph into this sort of feeling of lostness. What's next? What's going to come? How are we going to live after this? And we don't know. And then gradually something begins to take shape, and we know what next looks like, and we start to feel we've gotten there. And what Bridges says is to get there, we have to inhabit the whole thing. We have to be with all the feelings, all the thoughts, the good and the difficult, all the way through. And in personal life, what you hope for is you've made something good out of a life change and you're better than what you were. What we're hoping for is that the world comes through this, and it's a different kind of world. It would be very nice. It would be a better version. So the difficulty is letting go of the normal we've known and entering into the turbulence. And I assume all of you here are already there, but just in case anybody isn't, I'll help give you a shove. What I'd like to say, Bridges points out that the feelings that come up are very much colored by whatever life changes you've gone through earlier in life and how it turned out. What I realized at 2 o'clock this morning was I'm Irish American. And it took me into my 70s to realize that what went on in the 1800s, the potato famine, has shadowed and been present, a filter for understanding reality all the way through my generations to me. And so when I look at global warming, my first reactions are, all of us are the Irish. And this is the potato famine. And then there's a few powerful people who are the British, and they don't give our and so we're screwed. And then I realized, well, that's my filter. And those of you, so when you're processing stuff, think about your cultural background, your class background, your whatever. What's your filter that may be coming down through you? And many of you may have much happier expectations. So global warming is the initiation of a crisis in which hopefully big change can happen. So I'm going to go through the crisis. I will try to make it brief, right? As pain-free as possible. laws of the earth we've known. So more carbon dioxide makes it hotter, and a few other greenhouse gases, and more of it's still going up. To stop at 1.5 degrees Celsius being warmer than pre-industrial times, we need the amount of carbon and stuff going up to be equal to or less than the amount that plants and bacteria are able to take back out of the air. And we need to do that by 2050. To get there by 2050, we need to get the emissions declining by 2030, which makes for this 10-year window of opportunity. Or, as some would say, a 10-year window of really nervous times. For those of us who are Americans, I don't think in Celsius, I think in Fahrenheit. So I provided a translation so we know what we're talking about. Because it's kind of misleading for us. What they're saying now is by 2100, if we stay on the current path, the Earth as a whole will be 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer to 10.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. So not sure which it'll be, but in those ranges. So what are the impacts of this? And I'll just skim through some of them. There are places that are getting to be and will be uninhabitable because they're so hot. So Qatar, the temperature ranges now from 90 to 115 every day, and it peaks at 122. Phoenix, 50 times, I guess, airplanes couldn't take off. They had to be grounded because the temperature was 116 and the air was too thin to fly. So there's that, there's droughts, there's wildfires, of course. And then the ocean level, just the fact that the ocean is warming makes it expand so the sea level rises, right? And then Greenland is covered with an ice sheet that's 660,000 square miles and a mile thick, right? It is melting. If it melts completely, just because of that, the sea level will go up 30 feet. So we have island cultures that are already evacuating because they'll be underwater, right? And then coastlines and coastal cities, and I think it's 8 out of the 10 biggest cities in the world are on coasts. People will have to leave. So if you think of a 30-foot sea level rise here, man, Antarctica is also ice sheets, and they are melting. So if Antarctic ice sheets and the Greenland ice sheet all melt, we'd be talking about a 220-foot sea level rise. This is not by 2100. This would play out over some centuries, they expect. And then, of course, we have storms and floods like we haven't had before. So I will leave the pain at that. Now, what really scares us, I think, is not necessarily all that. It's our fellow human beings, who we kind of suspect might be just dumb enough, just stubborn enough to ignore all this and let all that happen. Our fear is we can't count on the other 8 billion of us to do what needs to be done. So we have a 10-year of opportunity. There are 3 broad potential outcomes. 8 billion people fundamentally reorganize life together in the next 10 years. I mean, it's going to be grand. This is really rocking, right? The second is that they don't. And we get hit with full-on trauma, and it takes maybe centuries to a millennia to get our footing back, really. And then the third is really the darker thing, the extinction of organized civilization, and it never makes a comeback. Or worse still, we become one of the species that goes extinct along with the others that are going extinct. So this is what scares us. We don't feel like we can count on each other. And again, I feel like we can't count on each other because I know we're all Irish in a potato family. And there's nothing to be done. We're just screwed. Others of you may look with an entirely different filter. And you may have courage, and you may have energy and dynamism, and you may know that there are a lot of people out there just like you who are wanting to get engaged and wanting to do the right thing. So, next piece of this, leaving normality and It is vital to make change now. People with a lot of power, who like having a lot of power, may have good hearts, but often they do what they do, and the only way they can access their hearts is to be stopped from their behavior first. So, nonviolent struggle is a thing to learn, right, if you don't know it. So it has three levels: protest, through which people experience solidarity, press for change; withdrawing cooperation that sustains power. My favorite example is if 40% of Facebook users go off Facebook for 3 weeks in the pressing for some demand, they might actually be heard. So that's the withdrawal of cooperation idea. And the third is you intrude on the practices of power, like the Extinction Rebellion people do when they lay down on the boulevards of Washington, D.C. and stop traffic in the name of preventing further global warming. The big resources to get educated about it, waging nonviolent struggle, Gene Sharp, Force More Powerful, Ackerman, and Duvall. What they don't tend to mention that we would say is in doing all that is important to always have in mind we're trying to unlock hearts into needed action. So we don't forget everybody has a heart someplace. There's a whole bunch of complex interventions that are needed, which I'm not going to go into. So now I want to walk through, we're informed that if we do certain kinds of things, we can keep things from getting worse. Good to know, right? So, and I want to talk about how this is interwoven with doing that. And to tell that story, I have to go back in time a little bit to the Cold War. And during the Cold War, there was a bit of a wish, a longing, and a dream that we could be a different kind of world. We could be better than what we were being. We could be happier together. We could all pull together for each other. We could be, as Morton Wright said, a global community who were good together. This was a dream that should not have been forgotten. But it required, to be fulfilled, we had to change the ground game of economics, of politics, and all that stuff. We had to change, and we couldn't manage to change the ground games. And so what happened, when the Cold War ended, we forgot the dream and we substituted a different one. Everybody would have prosperity, and it would be wonderful. And everybody would be high-tech, and it would be even more special. And so this became a dream that all the world could live like that, and we ran smack dab into nature's limits. This is what has gotten us there. So this fantasy was only ever a fantasy. It could never be real. The whole planet could never live like that, right? And so it might have been a fine dream, it might have been a fine wish, but it's not going to happen. And for a lot of people, the loss of that future that could have been feels like the most awful kind of loss. But the thing to know is, from the people who do post-traumatic growth, so these are people who research folks who have had some kind of trauma, usually in adulthood, usually it's physical, but they come out better as human beings in the wake of it. What do they have in common? And what they often have in common is they stumble into a situation where their hearts go out to somebody, and then they start making their life around doing more of that. And so they have a different good enough life. And it turns out, after a decade of doing that, they realize they love living this life more than they ever would have loved the other life. It would have been fine, but they wouldn't have felt as much for it. And so, as we lose a fantasy, the question is, can we stumble into a better kind of life together as a world that we would never have discovered if we hadn't gone through this loss? So with that in mind, I want to go through the solutions that hopefully in doing them we will change ourselves as a world. So I'm going to go through the sectors of the economy that produce greenhouse gases with the question of who needs to do what. And what I want to point out is that each one of them sets in motion a process of somebody who needs to be helped out. We need to help out each other to make it through this. And that's where we come in. We would notice that kind of thing. We would encourage that kind of thing. Everybody okay with this so far? We need David to sing a little more. No? I'll do that at the end. So, a quarter of greenhouse gases come from land use, so that means farming for one thing. Who would have thought it? So industrial farming, we have one kind of crop and big rows with big machines and petrochemical fertilizers. We need to shift it over to non-till, don't break up the soil kind of stuff, restorative agriculture and permaculture. It looks different. Plants are interplanted, like a forest is, like a jungle. And they actually take care of each other and help each other grow, and you don't need the pesticides and you don't need the chemical fertilizers. A wonderful little movie to get the hang of that is Biggest Little Farm. I think it's on Netflix. Biggest Little Farm, it's a gem, it's sweet, and it gives you the real sense of how it all works. So, a second kind of thing is from high meat diets to low meat diets, and that's because cows, pigs, and goats pass gas. Very indiscreet about this. The gas they pass is methane. And methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And when we have as many herds as we have worldwide as we do, we put up so much methane that it is a significant problem. So we need to shrink that. So here's my example of compassion. If you think about ranchers, that means giving up how they make a living, how they pay for a home, how they support their families. It means stepping away from all the skills that they are proud of, the hardiness of character that gets up day after day and does all this stuff, stepping away from it. None of that is easy. I think those who do that are heroes of our future. Right? They're making real sacrifices, and they need help. They need support financially, whatever, to get through all this. And I think they need to talk to each other and tell each other the stories of what they're going through and why they're doing it. But they also need to tell the rest of us. They need us to hear that they are our heroes. They are sacrificing for us. And we need to somehow reflect back to them that we get it and we honor them. So in all of these things, there are stories of sacrifice, of loss, of needs, of help received, help needed and help received. And then, at some point, they come into new lives. And then they're in a position to tell others, you know, it's scary when you make that sacrifice. It scared us, but it turned out good. And here's what we're doing now. And you'll find something too. So, we need to stop deforesting and reforest. And this is, I'm sorry I don't have the exact statistics, but I believe it's over 1 million square miles of forests on fire or burned down. And that's something I never thought about, wetlands. 85% of the wetlands, peatlands, that kind of stuff on the planet have disappeared since the 18th century. And this is in Indonesia and Malaysia. 13,000 square miles of wetlands have been gutted to make this. They're palm plantations. So they can sell palm oil to the global market, so they have an income as a country and as businesses and so on. So in all of these things, people need training. How do you convert this back to a wetland? How do you convert over to that kind of farming? People need training and help. Land grant colleges, people need your expertise. They need help with this. They need help with financial, what they're going to do now. We need to be there for each other. So if we make this work, we're changing how we do being a world together. We're starting to be there for each other instead of scaring the H out of each other. Energy production in industry is half of greenhouse gases. So the mantra is leave the oil and the coal and the unnatural gas in the ground and cut the percentage of electricity made by coal to 0% by 2050. Okay? So here's China dependence on coal, and India and the US. And I got to thinking, so you've got countries like that where their economic liveliness is dependent on, and they're going to shut down the coal? And they think about Saudi Arabia, how much of their economy is dependent on oil, and they're going to leave it in the ground? And Iran, Iraq, and Norway, they're going to leave it in the ground or the sea? This is, and the United States and Russia with gas, we're just going to leave it. How are we going to function? So we need help thinking about that. We need to turn to the rest of the world. We need the rest of the world to be here for us and help us go through that. And once you start having those kinds of relationships and obligations, you are a different world, right? So we're talking about building an infrastructure of radical reliability and interdependability across the planet. Industry needs to cut emissions by 75 to 90% by 2050. I am so ignorant of industry so far, I don't know what else to tell you about that. But I always emerge out of this with a question, well, how exactly do I keep my home warm in the winter? Other people, how do they keep it cool? How do we turn the lights on? How do we cook if we're leaving all that stuff in the ground? So the green world has answers, right? But the answers are not all they are cracked up to be. So solar panels and wind turbines cannot meet the current level of demand and are not such that they ever can meet the current level of demand, let alone an expanding level. Then there's something called biomass, where we don't burn down the forest, we systematically cut it down, take the logs to a dedicated facility, and then burn it and turn it into electricity. 156 square miles of forest per year in the US. But the thing that's really getting us through is unnatural gas, which is fracking and tar sands, oil, and that kind of stuff. Puts methane into the air, poisons the water. In places like Oklahoma, it sets off earthquakes. Not all it's cracked up to be, and then fourth generational nuclear. So what I want to say about this is, in terms of technical solutions, it's nice that people are trying, but the answers aren't in, and we need a lot of research and keeping on trying. There is a second whole approach to this, though. It's called radical reduction in energy demand. So, kilowatt hours per person per year. You can see that South Korea, Canada, the US are using a lot more than Russia, Japan, Germany, and France, who are using a lot more than Italy and the UK. We're using way more than India. So this is an issue of lifestyle. How do we change our lifestyles? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. We need people who know what to do to come along and help us out doing it. But it is not just lifestyle. In China, the total kilowatt usage per year, despite using less per person, is way, way up there compared to the rest of us because of population size. So what are you going to do about that? right? So there's lots of big changes required. I want to hit one other sector, which is transportation, 14% of greenhouse gases. And what's being touted is we are being rescued by electrical cars. But where does the electricity come from? Mostly from coal is where it's coming from. So it's not what it seems. And I have suspected there might be some significant problems with plugging these things in as they travel around the world, right? So what I'm anticipating is a radical reduction in distance transportation and much more local living. Which brings up my favorite hero, Fred Rogers, and the question he would ask, what makes a beautiful day in the neighborhood since you're going to be living there more? So, there's a couple of resources. This is a book by Helena Norberg Hodge, Locals Are Future. There's the website, Local Futures, and the New Economy folks that have a website as well. I would like to say the same thing, though in slightly more poetic terms. We are faced with rebirthing the communities we are. So the way of life issue, less shopping, more spiritual something, more community, you know, what would we find there? What would make that lovely and wonderful? And Karen Bradley is here somewhere, and she's been doing this, in this little community up in Canada. If you haven't heard about it, maybe we'll talk about it later. Around the world, what about the poorer places of people? Are we all in on this together? And the thing is, if we know about them and if we're with them in some kind of way they want help and so on, what does it do? It enlarges our hearts. It deepens our hearts, as only others can do. As only others can do. And so, then there's this thing, indigenous peoples, traditional, modern, and postmodern. Is this a hierarchy of wonderfulness? Or is this sort of a thing like this with different sectors on it, different sensibilities, different know-how, things like that? Maybe it's that. Because to tell you the truth, these folks know how to go out in the backyard and grow vegetables. I have not a clue. Not a clue. And I think most postmoderns with these fantastic new buildings that are being built also don't have a clue. So we need each other. This is me, dialectical path. I'm decentering and coordinating of the world. We need to decenter the concentrated wealth in the planet to get resources out to every community and culture. The knowledge of what's going on, the know-how, the resources, the income to weather it, that they want. Not that we think we should, whatever. They have to decide for themselves. We need to facilitate internal and external migrations. Remember those in uninhabitable places, people will be on the move, right? So relational practice, that's a whole kind of relational practice that needs to become a global norm. There's the internet and all this stuff around the planet. We need to invest big time in sustaining that. If we are more localized, that's the thing that will keep us connected, right? So we need to invest in that. Don't bank on global transportation systems because that hasn't been worked out. And we need to under-reproduce for several generations. And that's a whole topic into itself. It requires a lot of adjustment. We need to drop, it'd probably be good if we dropped by about 4 billion people over several generations. So there you go. So finding a different love of life. Advertising has sold us this sort of wonderful life, right? Of high tech and all this stuff. We need to let that go. We need to let go the fantasies that distract us from actual historic, traumatically challenging situations. It's okay to be present with them. In fact, it's even helpful, right? And so there's some inner work to be done. what do we nurture in each other? We nurture transforming realizations like we're the world together. How can we be the dialogue? The questions for each other and the mind to hear others' answers. How can we be good together? What would make this home for your people? What will make it home for us? What is home? What is that? What kind of world are you in when you look out around the world? As you see people preoccupied with territory, material resources, struggle for dominance, or do you see a world of people tending their own inner journeys towards understanding life, towards understanding themselves and others compassionately, towards understanding humanness in some compassionate way? Humility. We want to nurture humility, journey to understand how to be a world together. So listening for emerging realizations wherever they come from. And they might come from the least esteemed and admired corners of the planet. So we need to be in quiet and listening. And this is our mantra, every culture brings its own gifts, right? Every culture brings its own gifts, and we can't get there without all those gifts. Together they make a picture that without them we don't have. And meaning comes from making sure everyone is safe, everyone having everyone's back, pulling together for the most vulnerable and for the most dissociated elite, in which I include myself. Those of us who are just tuned in, right? Doing that is a sense of a path forward. So I'm going to wrap up with just a few things here. We need to have intergenerational love going into this. We really need to tend that. And we need to tend the intergenerational dialogue about global warming. Right? We need to, when you go inside to find what you feel, remember, you are descendants of the species that walked side by side with mammoths into the face of an advancing ice age, into the face of advancing glaciers. They didn't run away, and you have it in you. Everybody out there has it in them, that kind of fortitude and determination and strength. Mobilize it towards those targets. The farmers that need to change, the ranchers, the industries, each of those changes are targets. So this is interaction I've talked about, that's the outer action. There's technology things to do, but there's this nonviolent struggle, that's the outer action. Interaction alone is not enough. Outer engagement with those people to get them to change. And then inner practice, touchstones in everyday life. Danger pulls your neurobiology into a bad place. You need to counterbalance it. Desmond Tutu says you need to party as well, or you get sick. So is it sensual love, beauty, joy, inner serenity, whoever is heartwarming for you. Loving, needing to be loved and being loved. Gratitude. Whatever your spiritual wellsprings are, you're contributing to others, they're contributing to you. Those things need to be daily practices to keep sane and okay in the midst of the turbulence that is now upon us and will get more turbulent all through the rest of the century. Every positive change will lead to something else that needs to be changed. There will be no stopping point. This is the age of Aquarius, the age of fluidity. Just get used to it. And I wanted to kind of wind up with this. This is the cosmos. The cosmos has this great love of creating by blowing things up. The cosmos does cataclysmic explosions on a scale beyond imagination. And then it has this tender side. Who would think? But it creates plants and animals and us. And when we open our eyes The cosmos gets to see what it cannot otherwise see. Our eyes open and we see colors. Our ears open and we hear sounds. We touch, and there's touch. We smell scents, and we have tastes. And we look around, and we find we love, and we are loved. All of these are miracles in this kind of cosmos. They are miracles. No matter what happens between now and 2100, no matter what happens, these are always miracles, and they always will be. So, all sits now in the balance. And this is what today looks like. And the questions are, can we let go of that stuff? Can we together limit this stuff? And in the fluidity of the decades ahead, can we keep our footing and our heart's footing, our spirit's footing, and our skillful footing? Because of what really matters. Can we do this? We have to take the actions a world would take, all of whose people had grown up with effective love, even though we're not that world.
So breathtaking, Michael. So breathtaking. You had me at relational practice as a global norm. And he is the living example of that practice. And what you did today was talk about these difficult issues, but also shining a light on a path forward for all of us to carry. So, should we close up, or do you want to have any comments? Comments, thoughts, questions?
Maybe we need to bring the Brazilians to teach us, and don't bring to them Macarena anymore. We need to bring them up here to teach us how to cultivate, how to put together the fire, kind of going backwards a little bit, instead of bringing them more knowledge that is bothering their lives.
Thank you, Michael. I'm taking that with me back to Canada. But I wanted to say that you mentioned the Indigenous people, and one of the things that in my community has benefited from are the water protector grandmothers, who are fierce and very clear about what needs to happen, and they give us hope and a direction as well. And I just wanted to say, look around you. You don't know what wisdom is there until they step out and they lead us.
Reminder.
So the unfortunate thing about my doing this is that it's just me talking, and what Karen just said is so true. There's so much that you all have to say that turns this single thing into a much richer thing. So we wish we had a whole day to be just talking together. We will have one of the proposed bingo logs will be an opportunity to talk about that if you want. And Irene and I are going to do a monthly support group here in New York City for people who would like to gather and just talk about this stuff. So we're trying to follow up.
Irene, you want to say anything?
Michael, thank you for a fabulous presentation. What struck me as I was listening to you is we have to redefine what we mean by progress. We have been inundated with the notion of progress of going forward blindly in areas that have not taken account the interdependence of life. So I think part of this whole issue of how do we view climate change is not climate change, but a radical reorganization of society around a very different issue of what it means to progress.
Great point. Good point. One more.
Yeah, I just want to mention that the American Psychological Association had a task force on behavior change and climate, and what they found is that there's a very weak correlation between guilt, fear, doom and gloom, and emphasis on individual responsibility. That people change their behavior. If there's an action they know they can take that makes a difference, and also if other people are doing it, and that we need to change also all of our systems and our consciousness. But also I think that people will change their behavior if something is cool, and if other people, like I said, if other people are doing it, and if they had products that made it easy for them to do so. I have a patent on a reusable, well, I product like collapsible cup that eliminate 58 billion cups that we throw out every year that chop down 20 million trees and 12 billion gallons of water. But I need a business. I'm looking for to manifest it. But something like that if there's something that makes it easy, that people will do it. And people kind of have a hovering sense of guilt and all that. And just one other brief thing that you may or may not know that Jane Fonda has moved to DC for 4 months, and like right now, 11 o'clock every Friday, she does fire drill Fridays. And also thank you for mentioning Fahrenheit, and that we should use Fahrenheit because psychologically it's a higher number, and like 1 degree doesn't sound so bad, 1.2 doesn't sound as bad.
Yeah, just to know that at this moment, 20% of the planet is already at 1.5 Celsius, and 10% of the planet is already at 2 degrees Celsius. So things are moving apace. And I just also want to quote my wife Liliana, who says, growth comes through suffering and how we engage it. So I appreciate what Diane just said, and between the two, I think both are essential.
I hate to stop here, but I know we have more to talk